We like to try to start on time, and I think it is 7 o'clock. We've still got some people coming in at the back. So we'll just go ahead and get started, and they can catch up when they get here. We're delighted that you're here. Just a little housekeeping. If you do need the restrooms, go out this door to my left here, the double door over here. Go all the way down the hall to the church offices and take a left down there, and the restrooms are on either side of the water fountain. So just in case you need to know that. Tonight's program is one that has been requested by numerous people. And our challenge for the Education Committee of the Historical Society was finding someone who could do this program on Doctors of Stanley County. Fortunately for us, when Dr. Eric Johnson and Dr. Steve Seltzer retired, they agreed to do it. They've had to give up some of their golf time to do research, though. They have spent many hours researching for this program. They have put together a program called Health Heroes of Past Decades. I don't think any of us realized quite how much research and how much time it would take. And at one point, they spoke to me and said, "We are going to have to change the title of our program." And I said, "Okay, that will be fine. What are we doing?" They said, "We're going to do Health Heroes of Past Decades, 1850 to 1950. Otherwise, you will need to plan to serve these folks breakfast." So that's what we're doing for tonight. And I was going to tell you all about their education, their medical training, what all they have meant to this community. But if you can see, they're eager to get started. So I'm going to just forego that, and I'm going to just say that we welcome Dr. Eric Johnson, Dr. Steve Seltzer, two of Stanley County's most beloved family practitioners, and two of the finest men that I know, Dr. Johnson and Dr. Seltzer.
A fellow went up to Yogi Berra and said, "Yogi, what time is it?" Yogi looked at his watch and said, "You mean now?" "Well, it's 7 p.m. and we're going to start. These doctors are on time tonight." Okay. Welcome to Health Heroes of Prior Decades, Part 1. We'll tell you more about Part 2 coming up. And no, we don't have a special guest at Little Nas Z singing Old Town Road. This is Dr. Eric Johnson. I'm Dr. Steve Seltzer. Between us, we accumulated 75 combined years of practice in family medicine in Albemarle and Stanley County. We're both retired, and therefore we are permitted to have memory lapses and wandering dialogues. Now the disclaimers. You can take a break with your cell phone for the next 15 minutes. We have no financial affiliation with the Stanley County History Center, the Stanley Historical Society, nor any entity mentioned in this presentation. We received no compensation nor items of any value in associated with the preparation and execution of this program. Okay. Pat mentioned a few housekeeping announcements. With exits are accessible to my left here and through the back of the sanctuary on the left. As she mentioned where the bathrooms are. Please remember there are towel dispensers in every bathroom. Please do not tamper with or attempt to disable or destroy dispensers. Attempts to do so may result in arrest or criminal prosecution. Okay. Smoking is prohibited at all times in the sanctuaries, hallways, bathrooms, and elsewhere in the church complex. There are no restrictions against photography or recording any part of this program. We ask that the audience save all questions and comments until after the conclusion of our talk. As stated earlier, we are old and easily distracted, and we don't want to be interrupted and digress into a lecture about the mating dance of the prairie chickens in Wisconsin. Both Dr. Johnson and I will be available here after the end of our program. We will gladly entertain questions and discussions from the audience. autographs, pictures, and mementos that we will charge you for will be available at your request. Now for the acknowledgments. Like the Academy Award presentation ceremony, we have a number of people to whom we are indebted for their assistance in allowing us to stand up here and babble on. Unlike the Oscar Awards, there's no time clock prodding me to talk faster than I usually do. Dr. Johnson and I therefore humbly state our appreciation to our Lord and Savior for the blessing of being able to assemble with friends and neighbors, and in no set order to the following entities and people: to Central United Methodist Church for the use of the sanctuary, to Megan Sullivan and Paul Morrison of the Stanley County History Center for their invaluable assistance in retrieval of archived information, to Pat Bramlett of the History Society for her tireless work helping previous presenters as well as us with all the behind-the-scenes details and the very praiseworthy introduction, to Lewis Bramlett for his copious research on people and sites from previous decades in and around Stanley County, to our helpers, Dr. Rufus Leffler and Dr. Whitman Smith, for assisting us with information collection, to Les Young, who contributed volumes of useful information about Norwood physicians, to the museum personnel at community facilities in Baden, New London, Norwood, Oakborough, and Locust for their assistance, and multiple community residents who volunteered information and stories about past physicians, plus the audiovisual staff, Mark Sample, etc., who are here tonight to record this evening for posterity. And very special thanks are extended to our wives, Judy Johnson and Marlene Seltzer, who have offered their unflagging support for a task that has required far more work than we envisioned at the outset, but it has been genuinely enjoyable. If I have forgotten to include anybody else, please forgive me. I'm old and forgetful. Now to the meat and potatoes. We chose to limit the time span of this program from 1850 to 1950. As most of you know, Dr. Francis Crone is credited with being the first physician in Stanley County, beginning practice here about 1822. There are volumes written about Dr. Crone, and his house and museum at Morrow Mountain contain a large number of writings and artifacts about his life and practice. Given the magnitude of the health heroes, we felt compelled to mention that we have elected to start about 1850 and continue to 1950, when the two existing Albemarle hospitals closed and the Stanley County Hospital was born. Trying to pigeonhole prior positions in strict chronological order proved to be difficult, largely due to gaps in information in the pre-electronic era. So we are presenting to doctors according to the major site of their practice, given that many years ago, most doctors used a lot of their house for their office and spent most of their days riding in the country to make house calls. We have organized their names in alphabetical order in each town, but occasionally we vary from this. There are a number of physicians who were in practice in Stanley County both before and after 1950. Many of these arrived after World War II and spent most of their professional years practicing in the second half of the 20th century. However, there are several doctors whose accomplishments before 1950 merited inclusion in tonight's program. But don't worry, audience, we plan to offer part 2 of Health Heroes next year. That is 1950 to 2020. If a physician you came to hear about tonight was not mentioned, just mark your calendar when the date for our encore performance is released. Due to information shortages, there are some gaps. There are some physicians we just don't have much information on. We may even have overlooked some because there's nothing that we could find on them. But credible information is what we wanted. There are some interesting anecdotes and hearsay about doctors, but if we couldn't prove it, we didn't want to be held libelous. This program only covers physicians. Dentists, chiropractors, optometrists, podiatrists, and other healers are beyond the scope of our program. Again, we emphasize that the lack of information and gaps in timelines have limited the background we were able to acquire in a number of doctors, especially those from the 1800s. So please don't throw objects at us if we did not mention details you expected to hear. We only signed up for an hour tonight anyway. Also, some of our information comes from little bitty teeny obituaries, and even with refractive lenses, the optics can only do so much. So if we stumble over that a little bit, show us some mercy. And before Dr. Johnson takes control of the podium, we want to stress that we are paying homage to those hardworking physicians who preceded us by not using electronic devices in any form. Just as Chris Bramlett dressed like John Stanley in the former presentation about the origin of Stanley County, we are talking to you out there person to person without computers or PowerPoint presentation, just as the health heroes of 1850 to 1950 did in their conversations and examinations of patients before the business community took control of healthcare in America. The doctors of the bygone era in and around Stanley County were physicians and not providers, and their patients were human beings and not clients. We have a fascinating handout for you to keep and read. Dr. Johnson will tell you more about this soon. And here he is, the one, the only, Dr. Eric Johnson.
He would not let me look at that prior so I could edit it a little bit. So anyway, that's the Dr. Seltzer and the Raw. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to try to give you a perspective of medicine in the year 1900. I picked halfway between, you can do the math on that. For one thing, there was no standard for medical education in 1900. There were many medical schools built that were for-profit medical schools. In other words, it's the people who had established them really to make money rather than train physicians, unfortunately. There were no standard college requirements to enroll in medical school. In other words, they didn't require any biology, chemistry, or math to go to a medical school to some of them. And some students did not even go to college, medical students did not go to college, but they apprenticed under a local physician, and then they were accepted into one of these medical schools. In 1910, a famous study came out sponsored by the Carnegie Institute and supported by the American Medical Association called the Flexner Report. And it found that there were too many medical schools in the United States, and many were poor quality of education. And they reduced the number of medical schools from 155 down to 31. And they recommended that there were college prerequisites such as chemistry and biology to get in. And they also recommended that in medical education had to include anatomy and physiology, microbiology, pathology, biochemistry, for 2 years of instructions, and then 2 clinical years, in other words, working in the hospital with trained and qualified medical staff. They also recommended postgraduate training, that after medical school, that people would do an internship. By the way, those interns back there didn't make any money. They just got room and board, and that was about it. In Davidson, the first medical school I could come up with was called the North Carolina Medical College in Davidson. It had nothing to do with the University of North Carolina, nor with Davidson College back then. The first class graduated in 1894. It was a 3-year curriculum, and then it moved to Charlotte, and in 1917 to Richmond, and became the Medical College of Virginia. By the way, each state back then had their own medical board examination that you did have to pass in order to practice. In 1900, I want to review the leading causes of death. By the way, the life expectancy for a male in 1900 was 46 years, and for a female was 48 years. The number one killer then was pneumonia, followed closely by tuberculosis, also called consumption. Number 3 was, and I don't know if you know anyone who died of tuberculosis. I've only known a very few patients. It's been eradicated for the most part, or controlled. Diarrhea was number 3 killer. Heart disease, number 4. Now, this isn't just heart attacks, but what they used to call heart dropsy, congestive heart failure, and other heart disease. Strokes of all kinds were number 5. Renal or kidney diseases, number 6. Accidents, whether they were this is before automobiles, but these would be from fires, drownings, industrial accidents, or farm accidents. Cancer all-cause mortality in 1900, there were only 12,000 cancer deaths in this country. That's all fine. Number 9 was senility. Number 9 was senility. Number 9 was senility. Oh, I'm sorry. Number 10 was diphtheria. I never saw a case of diphtheria in 45 years in medicine. Remember also there were parasites, worms all over the place growing inside of people back then. In 1900, 30% of all deaths in the United States were children under 5 years of age. Today, that is 1.4% of all deaths, and that counts automobile accidents, fires, drownings, not just illnesses. Maternal death rate in 1900 was 1 out of every 100 women died in childbirth. Home births were done. Midwives did most of the deliveries. They had no formal training. There was no IVs, no anesthesias, no oxygen. The germ theory was still quite new. Pasteur, had developed that in the late 18th century. And antisepsis, in other words, cleaning of instruments and washing your hands, wasn't even started until Joseph Lister started in the 1870s. There were no ambulances then. There were no EMT people back then. In this county, in 1900, there were no hospitals. The closest hospital was in Salisbury. It wasn't until 1916, I hope I get Tallahassee or Tallahassee, anyone know the difference? I don't. The power company in Baden built the Baden Hospital and Clinic for $150,000. It had an x-ray machine. Remember, x-ray did not come about until 1895 when Wilhelm Röntgen invented x-ray. It also had an operating room. The charge back then, $18 a week in a private room, and you got fed too. And $14 if you're in a 4-bed ward. There were, however, 2 institutions that people came for healing, and they were the Rocky River Springs and Meisenheimer Springs, that people came to Mineral Springs. And even I've got a textbook from 1893 by Sir William Osler. He even recommends people going to Mineral Springs for therapy. Please refer to the handout. Don't read it now, but this was an agreement by the doctors of Stanley County and the Stanley County Medical Society in 1905 that they set prices on things. Today, of course, you'd go to jail for that, for price fixing. Okay, the first Albemarle Hospital opened in 1923, the Tally Brunson Hospital, which was by 2 private doctors. There were no public hospitals then. It became the Stanley General Hospital, and it was in the old Albemarle Hotel building, the site of the current courthouse. The Yadkin Hospital opened in 1927. It was also privately owned. A number of doctors, such as Dr. J.G. Hall, Dr. W.T. Shaver, Dr. L.V. Dunlap, and incorporators from Albemarle, Dr. Layton, Hill, Lentz from Norwood, Haythcock and Campbell, New London, Dr. Allen, and Oakboro, Dr. Hartzell. They each put up $30,000 to build that for a cost of $300,000 to build that. They had x-ray, they had an operating room. Present day Taylor House is in there. What diagnostic things were available back then? There were no laboratories in 1900. Dr. Seltzer said they had to use their noggins to figure things out. It wasn't until 1940s that the first pathologist, a Dr. John Johnson, Johnsson, no kin, who worked here just for a year or so in the Yadkin Hospital. But before this, they didn't do biopsies. They had no tissue slides to do. There were no mammograms, no ultrasounds, no MRIs, no CT scans. The first cardiogram in Stanley County wasn't until 1951 when Dr. George Buck Edens brought the first EKG machine here, and he also was the first doctor to do pap smears. There, as far as therapies go, no IVs, transfusions, oxygen, respirators, no antibiotics, nothing for high blood pressure. The first treatment for diabetes didn't come out until 1922, and Banning and Best in Toronto developed that. And most of the current treatments that we have today were not even available. Quarantines were common. Quarantine meant you stay at 40 days in place. And I remember as a boy when measles and whatnot were quarantined. And tuberculosis was treated by isolation. You sent them off to sanatoriums. They reused syringes and needles. Had to make their own bandings and dressing. The Band-Aid didn't come out until 1924. There were no there were some vaccinations. Smallpox in 1795 by Jenner, but the first antitoxin, first shot for diphtheria did not come out till 1894. Then in 1914, typhoid and a number of others came out. 1954, I remember that was polio. Did you hear about the guy who lost his entire left side?
No.
He's all right now. Okay, the first community we're going to do is Baden. And I want to thank Jerry Hall and David Summerlin. They have got a great museum out there. It is organized so well. It's very nice. And I'm going to go over a couple of the doctors who practiced out there. This is Benjamin Franklin Cox, who went by initial BF. He was born in Randolph County in 1851. Went to the College of Physicians and Surgeons in Baltimore, and he practiced in Palmerville from 1881 till his death in 1934. 53 years he practiced. He was on staff at the Baden Hospital, and he was held in very high esteem by not only his patients and the community, but the doctors as well. A doctor that some of you may be familiar with is Dr. Alberti Fraser Lapsley. He went by Fraser Lapsley, born in 1906, and he lived until 1977. Dr. Seltzer actually met Dr. Lapsley. He went to medical school in Charlottesville at the University of Virginia. And he and his wife Janie had no children, but he practiced 40 years at the Baden Hospital and Clinic from 1936 to 1976. He had an excellent rapport with children, and I'm told that his trademark was that he always wore a rose in his lapel. He was available 24/7. People could come to his house or see him, and he took his own x-rays and had to develop his own x-rays. None of this x-ray tech stuff. The first African-American physician in Stanley County was Dr. William Young, who was born in 1889 in Monongahela, Pennsylvania. I can say Monongahela. He excelled in both academics and athletics and graduated from Monongahela High School in 1904. He was 14 years old when he graduated from high school. He never had driver's ed either in 1904. Okay. He was then admitted to the Leonard Medical School at Shaw University in Raleigh. I could find nothing about this, but apparently this was one of the medical schools closed by the Flexner Report in 1910. And then he went to Western University of Tennessee in Memphis in 1910 and graduated there. He worked in Charlotte and area, and in 1925 he came to Baden to practice, and unfortunately his wife passed away in January of 1926 while in labor. Dr. Young married his second wife in October of the same year, and they lived in Baden until the early 1930s, and he moved on to Thomasville and did live a good long life, and he passed away in 1952 back in Pennsylvania. There are some other Baden doctors that I have on the list, but since there was no hospital in Albemarle, Dr. Shaver, a surgeon from Albemarle, practiced out there. Dr. Layton from Albemarle practiced out there also. Alcoa hired some doctors to work in first aid because at that time safety was not emphasized in American industry, and there was no workman's comp and nothing there, so they could have 2 full-time doctors just working on accidents. Now, we've done a lot of research. I want to remind you that stealing from one source is called plagiarism, but what we have done is stole from many sources, which is called research. And Dr. Seltzer is going to take over Albemarle right now. It's all yours, sir.
First, I'm going to read the quote valedictory address written by E. Burke Haywood, M.D., presented to the Medical Society of the State of North Carolina at their 16th annual meeting in May of 1869, 150 years ago. I don't know if he was a valedictorian or what, but this is the address. The address was 20 pages, single-spaced, typewritten. I'm not going to read that all to you. You'll not only need breakfast, you'd need lunch if we did that. Okay. I'm going to read one paragraph from early in his speech. A physician's life is one of toil, of self-denial, of inadequate pecuniary compensation. He has no time he can properly call his own. Other men engaged in laborious pursuits are permitted to partake of their food without interruption and to sleep quietly at night. Not so with the physician. For him, no season is sacred. He is liable to be called at any hour. The Sabbath, a day of rest to others, is to him often a day of incessant toil. This was 150 years ago. Now we're going to move to Albemarle.
It got a lot better, didn't it?
Yeah. As we said, most of these are going to be in alphabetical order. Sometimes we deviate from that. And I'll also mention in Dr. Johnson's presentation, Dr. Lapsley is an example of a physician who was very prominent here before 1950, even though his exact time frame was longer after 1950. So we bent the rules to satisfy what we thought was right. Okay, starting with the Andersons. Father and son, one of very few parent-child combinations of physicians in Stanley County. Dr. Richard Anderson was born in Davie County in 1835. He went to New York for the study of medicine, received his degree in 1856, and took internship at the notorious Bellevue Hospital in New York City. Interestingly, he had a brother who went to the same medical school, graduated at the same time, but was not a twin. Dr. Anderson came to Albemarle in 1858. He married a local girl who was named Mary Forrest, and they had 6 children. One of them became a physician, Dr. Jasper Neil Anderson, who was known by Jap, which wouldn't be a politically correct name now. Dr. Anderson was born in that is Dr. J.N. Anderson, his son, was born in Mississippi at a later time. In 1872, it appears that Dr. Robert Anderson's father took a sabbatical or perhaps did a Peace Corps or public health stint in Mississippi. It isn't clear to me why, after 14 years here, he spent some time in Mississippi, but he came back. I'm going to read something that was said about Dr. Richard Anderson. He was badly handicapped by lack of equipment, modern drugs, and pharmacies, but like all the old-timers, had the ability to diagnose troubles competently and to do almost any surgery required. Possibly due to his experiences while serving the South in the Civil War, Dr. Anderson could take hardships of weather and fatigue due to the long trips by horseback and buggy he was called upon to make while attending to his patients. He was active in political affairs and was rewarded by the Democratic Party for being sent to the state Senate to fill the unexpired term of a Democratic senator in the 28th Senatorial District of North Carolina. He was there from November 1874 till March 1875. He chose not to run for re-election. 2 years later, he ran for the same seat in Senate and was defeated. His son, Dr. J.N. Anderson, was born in Mississippi, but went to school. It wasn't clear. He went to a number of schools, including some place in Indianapolis, but I have no further information about that. After graduating from school, we're not certain exactly when, he practiced in Lexington, North Carolina, and in 1899, he became ill and returned to Albemarle to rest and to be with his father. Unfortunately, Dr. Robert Anderson died shortly thereafter at age 87, and so Dr. J.N. Anderson recuperated and continued to work for a while, but he became ill about 2 decades later, and I think by connecting the dots, he died of tuberculosis because he died in a sanatorium in Statesville. And it stands to reason that he was sick. From this illness, he got recuperated at the turn of the century, and he died there. So we don't know a whole lot about the younger Dr. Anderson. He did volunteer in World War I and was a member of the Medical Corps stationed in France and got numerous awards. So that's the Andersons. Next Albemarle physician is Dr. Victor Lewis V.L. Bigler. He was born in Pennsylvania in 1894, and he attended medical school in Pittsburgh. World War I broke out, and Dr. Bigler enlisted and served in France, as did Dr. J.N. Anderson. Dr. Bigler rose to the rank of captain. It appeared he had not completed medical school when he entered the military. After the armistice, at which time he was only 24, he returned to the United States, completed his medical education, and settled in Kinston, North Carolina, to practice several years. He relocated to Albemarle in 1929 and became a, quote, resident physician, unquote, at the Yadkin Hospital, which sounds to us like what we call a hospitalist today. In January 1933, Dr. Bigler left his position at the hospital to start general practice in the Hill Building on 2nd Street, where he continued to practice until 1945, a span of 16 years. From newspaper accounts, Dr. Bigler had become, let me revise that. He relocated to Albemarle in 29 and was in Albemarle a total of 16 years, 14 of which were spent, my math is off, 12 years of which were spent in his own practice. From newspaper accounts, Dr. Bigler became chronically ill, was admitted to the Medical College of Virginia Hospital in Richmond, which actually was the actual training site for both Drs. Whitman Smith and Dr. Davis Ford of this community. After an unnamed operation, Dr. Bigler succumbed on January 21, 1945, at the age of 51. The obituary in the SNAP listed several Stanley County residents who were close friends of Dr. Bigler that attended the funeral. it appears to me that the format of obituaries has changed in the last 74 years. There was a man who was walking down the street in Albemarle, and he saw a sign that said, "Talking dog, inquire within," with an arrow pointed to the house. So he said, "I've got to see this." He walked to the house and knocked on the door, rang the doorbell, and the man came in, and the man came up and said, "I've got to see this talking dog." And the owner says, "Well, I'm the owner, but he's giving an interview for Channel 9. You're going to have to be very quiet." So the man walks in there, and there's one of the reporters for Channel 9 interviewing him, and the dog said, "Yeah, now my first job, I was a sentry and a reconnaissance dog over in Iraq, and then I got sent to Afghanistan. And then after a few years of that and collecting a number of medals, I came home to Stanley County, and I decided to work on the community table and then delivering Meals on Wheels. And I saw there was a need for teaching English as a second language at Stanley Community College, and I embarked on that." And the visitor says, "The dog did all that, and you want to sell him?" He says, "That dog's a pathological liar. He's never done any of that." Okay. And now it goes back to Dr. Johnson.
Next, Edward Porcher Brunson, who was born in Florence, South Carolina in 1897. He did his pre-medical training at the University of South Carolina in Columbia and went to medical school at Thomas Jefferson Medical School up in Philadelphia and graduated in 1921, came to practice in Albemarle in 1923. Where he joined his classmate, Dr. Talley, whom we will talk about later, but they opened the first hospital. It was a Talley Brunson Hospital in 24, then it became the Stanley General Hospital. Dr. Brunson was the chief surgeon and medical director of the hospital. That would be 26 years while it was open. He served in Africa and Italy during World War II. He was 45 years old when he went into the service. Kent Harkey, who sells real estate here, I don't know if you're out there anyway, but Kent's daddy served with Dr. Brunson in Italy. We were there at a military set. We were in Florence, and outside there's a military cemetery out there, which will grab you right here when you see all those white crosses there. But anyway, I did not know that. Held Dr. Brunson in high esteem. Dr. Brunson also built a place that was called Quinby Mall. That's Stanley Commons today. And by doing this, I found out how Quinby Mall got its name, is that the Brunson family's ancestral home back in England was called Quinby Hall. He was a member of the Presbyterian Church, which is that, let's see, it's down that way, isn't it? And he also helped coach Toby Webb's legendary Albemarle High School football teams with a lot of injuries and medical issues that they had at that time. And anyway, that was a fine old man.
We move on in Albemarle to Dr. L.V., that's Lucius Victor Dunlap, known as Vic. Dr. Dunlap, I believe, holds the record of the longest tenure in Albemarle. Only 57 years. He was born in 1884 on a farm in Anson County, and he spent 3 years at Rutherford College, which I'm not certain is still in existence, and then 4 years studying medicine at the University of North Carolina. I do not know if that was the North Carolina Medical School, or I don't think Carolina had a 4-year medical school at that time. Anyway, for 2 years he decided to practice in Raleigh, and then where he had an associate in general practice, and then he moved to Ansonville for a very short time where he practiced with another doctor, then relocated to Albemarle in August 1909. In the First World War, he volunteered for active duty and was sent to France, as many of our physicians that we mentioned were, and was a flight surgeon with the fledgling Army Air Corps, and had a very productive military career. He didn't get back to the United States till 1919 due to the great demand for transporting troops after the armistice, and he resumed his medical practice then. One interesting sidelight of Dr. Dunlap is that for 13 consecutive years after he returned to Albemarle in 1919, he spent 1 month every year at the postgraduate hospital in New York City, and took specialized training in pediatrics, obstetrics, internal medicine, and pathology. He married a lady from Wilmington in 1911, and I think another interesting tidbit that affects us right here in this building is he helped to build the Central Methodist Church and was always an active member. And one thing I found out about him, he lived at 408 South 4th Street. In those days, Albemarle was not very big, and the residential area was basically concentrated around what we call downtown. A lot of times we could not find where the physicians lived, but many times they lived very close to town. So it kind of surprised me to learn the address, and you'll hear some more about that. Dr. Dunlap left practice at age 82 in 1966 after 57 years. He went to live with his daughter in Morganton after his wife had already died. And he had a number of noteworthy quotes and observations that I think are very pertinent. You know, 1966 wasn't that long ago. You were already grandfather then, weren't you? No.
I was in 4th grade.
All right. Hormones. Okay. I want to read some of these because I think they're very eye-opening. Dr. Dunlap said in 1966, "When I came here, the town was small and the county population was small. I used to think I knew everybody in the county. Today, I see people on the street whose names I do not know, but in them, I see the resemblance to their parents, whom I knew in earlier years. I sometimes ask them who their parents were, and I find that I was right about the resemblance." Furthermore, Dr. Dunlap stated, in 1909, the practice of medicine was a lot harder than it is now. We had no good roads, no automobiles, and we made our trips over the county by horse and buggy. It often took a day to see a patient in the county and get back. We didn't have the advantage of sulfa drugs and others of similar nature that have added to the practice of medicine so much in later years. We had to depend upon diagnosis and the use of staple remedies, which up to that time were the only ones to employ. A lot of those were herbs and roots. We were on call day and night, rain or shine, and would often be gone from home for the entire day and night. But we were young and healthy and didn't mind the work so much. I believe that opinion would be shared by only a minority of medical students now. I remember the excitement and interest generated when the old Whitley development started, old Whitney it should be, and leading up to the present aluminum plant in Baden. The textile mills were about the only industry in the county. It has been a pleasure to watch other industries spring up and flourish and make Stanley County one of the leading counties of North Carolina. Yes, he said that. As so far as payments are concerned. Agriculture, too, has made astounding progress in later years. Added to asked what he intended to do after retirement, Dr. Dunlap was very emphatic. "Just as near nothing as I can," he said. "I have certainly retired from the practice of medicine. If I want to come back to Albemarle for a visit, I'll come and stay as long as I want. After all, I've been here a long time, and it's home." That's Dr. L.V. Vic Dunlap, and I'd never heard of this man. Some of the older doctors in town remember him. He certainly was a legend. And with that, it goes back to Dr. Johnson.
Okay, this is, next physician is Dr. Dennis Fox, who's a surgeon here. These are recollections by Dr. Whitman Smith that we could come up with. He went to Chapel Hill, the medical school. At that time, there was only a 2-year school, and then you had to transfer to another school, and he transferred to Vanderbilt Medical School in Nashville, graduating in 1937. He stayed in Nashville for his internship and did his surgery residency then. He married a Miss Helen Jones in 1939. He practiced in Randleman, North Carolina, in Greensboro in 1940 and 41. And then World War II, as we know, broke out, and he volunteered to join the Vanderbilt General Hospital. They sent it because he had connections there. They went to Italy for World War II, and he was discharged in January 1946. Came back and then came to Albemarle and practiced with Dr. Shaver, so he had two top quality surgeons there at the Yadkin Hospital. He practiced here 17 years and left Albemarle around 1963. And again, Dr. Smith, probably some of you Older people out there may remember Dr. Fox. And not to be outfoxed, Dr. Seltzer.
There was another Fox here, Dr. R.E. Fox. Not many people knew him. He was Robert Eugene Fox. And a little background on him. He was born in 1899 in Hillsborough, North Carolina. He attended Weaver College, which might be in Weaverville near Asheville, but I don't think it's any longer in existence. And it says he graduated from Duke University in 1919. I thought it was still Trinity College back then. Well, we have a typo here. I didn't write it. He taught school in Asheville from 1919 until 1922 and entered the University of Pennsylvania to study medicine, graduating in 1926. He interned and served his residency in Danville, Pennsylvania, and in 1928 went to private practice in Asheville before becoming head of the Buncombe County Health Department, which position he held from 1930 to 1932. He then entered Harvard University and received a degree in public health in 1934. For the next 14 years, from 1934 to 1948, Dr. R.E. Fox worked with the State Board of Health, where he was director of the Division of Public Health Administration. He is credited with organizing health departments in every county of the state, which did not previously have one. He left Stanley County early in the 1950s to pursue employment elsewhere. We do not really have a record on that. He actually took over the job in 1948 as the first full-time Stanley County Health Director. He took that job over from Dr. Nash McKenzie, who found that he could not maintain a private practice and do the work at the health department simultaneously. That was in 1948. Dr. Fox lived at 1011 East Main Street, if you're interested in the address, and he retired to Albemarle, died at age 71. And a very unfortunate circumstance of his death, he was home alone, just having returned from Charlotte, where his wife was hospitalized, when he apparently collapsed and died and was found by a neighbor. You could speculate that he died of a broken heart, but that's Dr. R.E. Robert Eugene Fox. Not many people had heard of him, but I think he was noteworthy for his standing in the public health arena. And before I turn it back over to him,
Johnson.
I want to tell you about something that happened at the library not long ago. A fellow goes in the library and goes up the desk, and the lady says, "May I help you?" He says, "I want a Big Mac, supersized fries, and a large Coke." And she says, "This is a library." He says, "Okay, I want a Big Mac, supersized fries, and a large Coke." Dr. Johnson.
I have to endure this when we go golfing together. I want you to know that. Just going to bring up a few things about the infrastructure of Stanley County back in those days. Of course, in 1900, there was no electricity in this town. People used kerosene lamps when they went out to the outhouse. They had their water was drawn from wells. You couldn't go turn on the tap back then. As far as sewage goes, people used outhouses back then. I found this in my research. Septic tanks had not come into common use until 1940. And toilet paper didn't come available until after World War I. By the way, the earliest Northern tissues bragged they had no splinters in their paper. First phone service, just in the city of Albemarle, was around 1920. So how did you get in touch with a doctor if your family member was sick? Somebody had to get on a horse and go through whatever kind of weather, whatever kind of terrible roads, and get to the doctor. So that when he got to the doctor's house, the doctor said, okay, they must be sick, otherwise they would not have gone out in weather like this. The first paved road that left Stanley County was when 2427 came here sometime in the mid-20s. Before that, it was all dirt. And again, of course, they used horses before automobiles were. Before automobiles were available, they had to use horses, either ride them, the doctors ride them, or have a carriage, and that left a lot of horse excrement around, which is not that healthy. What kind of pharmacy did you have? So you saw the doctor and he gave you a prescription. What'd you do then? Did you go call up the McNeil brothers down there in Norwood? Because they'd come in 24/7 and fill a prescription for you. I know that. But anyway, there were no pharmacies back then. Doctors had to make their own medicines many times in their offices. I'm going to have 3 doctors here with the same last name, and that is Gaskin. I was partners from 1980 to 1986 with John Stover Gaskin Jr., and he gave me much of this information that I tucked away. His father, John Stover Gaskin Sr., Dr. John as he was known, was born around Kershaw, South Carolina, on his family farm in 1898. He went to college at Southern, I'm almost saying Southern Cal, to South Carolina, USC, Columbia, and went to medical school in Charleston. He married a classmate, Dr. Madge Baker, there. And they practiced in South Carolina, I believe around Chesterfield for a few years, and they came to Albemarle in 1930, and the first office was in the Harris Building on West Main Street, wherever that was. They built their own office on 2nd Street, right across the street over here, in what's now the Uwharrie Bank headquarters. And the front was Morell's Pharmacy, and their office was behind that. Dr. John would every morning get a list of house calls, and he would drive throughout the county. A lot of people didn't have automobiles back then, even though there were roads. So he would make house calls all morning, did a lot of home deliveries of babies. At noon, he'd come in, and someone would have called in for his afternoon list of rounds while Dr. Madge stayed in. In the last 10 years he practiced, he gave that nonsense up. He practiced at the Yadkin Hospital for inpatient work. He also helped coach Toby Webb's football teams and did free physicals on all the ball players back then. He was very active in the First Baptist Church. That's the one up that way. And he had two daughters, two sons, but both sons, John Jr. and Joe, became physicians. He also had a brother, Lewis, who practiced in Albemarle that I'll get to. He died in Wyoming while visiting his son Joe out there. So, anyway. His wife, Sarah Madge Baker Gaskin, was born June 6, 1900 in South Carolina. Her daddy was a Baptist preacher. We got a Baptist preacher in the front row. It's good to have him here. Because he was a preacher, she got a scholarship to Winthrop College in Rock Hill and graduated in 1921 and went to the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston, graduating in 1926, the only female graduate in her class. And then she married her classmate, John Stover Gaskin. They had practiced with him, moved to Albemarle, as I said. She was the first woman to practice medicine in Stanley County. Her son, John Jr., when he was in college at Chapel Hill, got in fistfights sometimes by saying that his mother was a doctor, and they said, "Oh, your mother couldn't be a doctor. You mean she's a nurse?" Well, if you knew Dr. John Stover Gaskin Jr., his fuse was about this long, and that person who said that got blasted, a good one, huh? Okay. She also did pre-employment physicals for Wiscasset Mills. There were about 5,000 employees for Wiscasset Mills back in those days, and treated minor injuries sustained at the mill. She practiced almost 50 years, and she died in 1979. In the old hospital, I was the last new doctor in the old hospital. Her paging number was number 6. They didn't say, "Dr. Seltzer, please call the emergency room." They would say, "Number 6. Call the emergency room." But I inherited her number, so that's a little legacy there. Got a picture of her here, too. I did not know her. And Lewis Roy Gaskin, also born in Kershaw, was the older brother of John Gaskin. He was born in 1896 on a family farm, as I said, that was burned to the ground by General William Tecumseh Sherman when he was passing through South Carolina in 1864. He also went to, not Sherman, but Gaskin, went to college at medical school at Charleston, practiced in South Carolina until 1932, and when he found out that his brother was up here in Paradise, he couldn't wait to join him. So he set up practice in the Albemarle office. His office was next to, when I moved to town, it was Louder Hardware, but I think it was called Morrow Heath Hardware, and where that barber shop is, and he practiced back there. He also made house calls. He was an active member of the Lions Club. He was a Mason, and also active in that church on the other side of the street, just on the other side of the Phillies. He had 2 sons, Reed and Lewis, both of who were physicians. And you remember Reed, of course, was the first ophthalmologist here. Dr. Gaskin, in 1950, Dr. Lewis Gaskin, shortly after the Stanley County Hospital was built, he had a boy that had a tonsillectomy that morning. He went back to check on the boy, and while he was in the boy's room, he dropped dead. Boom, right in the hospital. The guy goes into the doctor and said, "Doc, I can't help but singing the green, green grass of home."
That sounds like the Tom Jones syndrome to me.
Is it common?
It's not unusual.
Okay, wake up. Okay. Next is Julius Clegg Hall, Dr. J.G. Hall. Date of birth was 23rd November 1874 in Montgomery County, across the river. He attended Trinity College, which before it was in Durham, it was actually in Randolph County. He got a degree called a Bachelor of Philosophy. I don't know. Anyway, he went to medical school at the University School of Medicine. Let me get my notes right. In Davidson. He practiced at Boardman, North Carolina. He was a surgeon for the Butters Lumber Company and also Atlantic Coastline Railroad. Doctors getting out of training didn't have any money, so oftentimes these big companies, railroads, would hire people to be their doctor until they got enough money to get into private practice. Well, Dr. Hall then married a girl from Albemarle, Edith May Fitzgerald, and moved here to Albemarle in 1906. And he was as a physician and a surgeon. His office was in conjunction. He opened a pharmacy called Hall's Pharmacy. He was known for his marvelous seltzer-like personality, and he had a special way with children, I'm told. His office hours, he started at 7 to 9. Then he made house calls and came back to the office from 4 to 6. He built and lived in that beautiful house on North 2nd Street that David Scarborough is restoring at this time, the one that's got the Greek temple out in the yard. He also was a Mason, and he was a member of Central United Methodist Church. Here we are.
Before it was United. Right?
Thank you. It was yes. We won't go, okay. He died at the young age of 55 in 1930, which was actually longer than life expectancy at that time. And again, he was one of the main planners and builders of the Yadkin Hospital. Next is William Isaac Hill, going by the initials of W.I., born around 1875. He was educated in Stanley County Public Schools. Now, I was thinking, what public schools were there in Stanley County in 1880s? Probably not many, but he did go to Davidson College and ended up going to medical school at the University of Maryland, where Dr. Gaither graduated from. He practiced in Albemarle from 1898 to 1951. 52 years the man practiced here. And he was known for traveling around the county first in a horse and buggy, and then he got one of the first cars to travel around Stanley County. He was also an incorporator of Yadkin Hospital in 1927, where the Taylor House is today. He built the Hill Building, which is where the Pinnacle Bank is now. I think most of us remember when the Hill Building was there. And it's one place, All-Star Mills and the Hill Building is where all the pigeons lived, I remember when I moved here. But Dr. Hill and many physicians had offices in the 5-story building, and he put something in there called an elevator that was really neat. His son, William Henry Hill, practiced in Albemarle for many years. And anyway, part of his legacy. Dr. Seltzer.
My turn?
It's your turn.
Dr. Ogden Doremus King was born in Little Washington, North Carolina, in Pamlico County in 1859. He probably inherited the inclination to study medicine from his father, Dr. J. Francis King, who was a Confederate Army surgeon stationed at Fort Fisher. At the age of 14, Ogden King was sent to a military academy in Warrenton, Virginia, and later studied medicine, received his degree at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, and served his internship at Bellevue Hospital in New York City, as did Dr. Richard Anderson. As a boy of 16, Dr. King made his first visit to Albemarle around the year 1875, spending time with his cousin, a Reverend Mr. Racaud, R-I-C-A-U-D. We could find nothing else about him. He was a Methodist, so we're in the right temple here. The cousin lived in a little brown house that stood on a lot on what used to be South Street, now called West Martin Luther King Jr. Drive, which later became the Eford Apartments, which later now is owned by the Lutheran Church. It's across the street from the old Home Savings and Loan Building, soon to be the headquarters of the Albemarle Police Department. Okay, fast forward to 1885. We do not know what happened in between his graduation from medical school and at that point in life when he was about 26, but he came to Albemarle, stopping off here on his way to a vacation trip in Florida. There was plenty of game animals available in this part of the country, so Dr. King decided to do some hunting before going on to Florida. While he was here, he lived in a building known as the office at the S.H. Hearn Home Place. Where is that? Does anybody know where that is? S.H. Hearn Home Place? Anyway, First Street? Okay. Is it still there? All right. Thank you. One December evening, returning through the woods from a hunt, Dr. King came by the Hearn Cemetery in South Albemarle. I know where that is. That's where 52 or South First, South Second converge, just north of that convenience store. And he came to the cemetery, and there was a funeral taking place at that time. He quietly placed his gun against an old rock wall and entered the enclosure. For the first time in his life, he saw Miss Elizabeth Hearn, his future wife, standing at the graveside of her aunt, Mrs. Patty Hearn Pemberton. 2 years later, in September 1887, they were united in marriage at Central Methodist Church. Thereupon, Dr. King settled in Albemarle and began to practice medicine. He erected the second brick building in Albemarle in the site that formerly was occupied by the A&P store. I believe that's where the Stanley Arts Guild now, isn't it? Is, and a number of people, building establishments and businesses and such had been headquartered in that building later. He later moved his office to the room occupied by the city newsstand. Was that where City Barbershop used to be? Okay.
I'll tell him later.
Okay, I just wondered.
He'll forget, but I'll tell him.
Forget what? All right. Okay. Dr. King was called upon to perform some of the earliest surgical operations that were done in the county. Dr. King was impressed with the fact that the African American population in Albemarle had no central community and that no provision had been made for such. He laid off and promoted the establishment of the black section now known as Kingville in 1898. He built and gave African American people of the day the Methodist Church building and the trustees of the church, to whom and also he gave to the trustees of the church several building lots free. A more modern church building has been built on the original site. These acts of charity, along with his charitable medical practice among the African American population, caused the recipients to name the little town of Kingville for Dr. Ogden Doremus King. For several years of his practice in Albemarle, he was the surgeon for the Southern Railway. At the time of his practice, there were no drugs or prescriptions. We have learned that from hearing about other doctors. And there was no drugstore either. He was also trained as a dentist and filled in extracting teeth in the absence of a dentist in Albemarle. He lived in the town when there were no paved streets, no electric lights, no waterworks, and no railroads. Somehow he was the physician for the Southern Railroad. But like all pioneers, he did the best he could with the facilities on hand. For this, he will be remembered. Dr. King and his wife and 5 children lived in the same house that he stayed in when he visited earlier. That is that house across from the future police department on West Martin Luther King Jr. Drive. He died at the age of 49. We don't know of what cause, at the age of 21, but he is certainly a pioneer in the history of Stanley County. Next is Dr. Johnson.
Okay, Dr. James, anyone who wants to leave here at 8 o'clock, you won't hear all the program, so.
You'll get a D on your exam afterwards.
Dr. James J. Layton, born and raised on a farm east of Albemarle, studied under Professor E.F. Edens at the Yadkin Mineral Springs Academy. He later then attended, there was no public high school back then. He attended Davidson College and graduated and then stayed there and went to the medical school in Davidson and spending, and then he went to New York and New Orleans for training. He passed his medical boards in general practice. In 1904, he practiced in Greene County briefly and then came back to Albemarle in 1905 and practiced until 1952, 47 years. And again, made house calls on horse and buggy. He described the diseases that he had to treat back then. Malaria. I've seen malaria, but it's because I was in Southeast Asia. Typhoid, pneumonia, childhood diseases that we rarely see anymore, measles, scarlet fever, diphtheria, pertussis, whooping cough. His first automobile was a second-hand Rio. It was so unreliable, then he got a good old Model T Ford in 1914. He described Albemarle in 1904 when he came here as a small village with few stores and houses. Remember, the mills were only a few years old, no water or sewer. During the 1918-1919 flu epidemic, 5% of the world died in that epidemic. It was so horrible. Anyway, it wore him out so much that from 1919 until he retired, he limited his practice to eye, ear, nose, and throat. There is a book of obstetrical deliveries before he went to the ENT over in the History Museum that's in his folder that is quite remarkable. I see we have descendants of the next doctor, Clarence Manteo Lentz. I wondered if there was someone who had the middle name of Murphy in there to cover Murphy to Manteo. No? Okay. Never mind. He was born April 3rd, 1885 in Cabarrus County, and his dad moved to Albemarle and was a merchant here shortly after his birth. He attended the Albemarle City Schools, which I think was probably just was Central School when my kids attended that. He went to Davidson College. He was captain of the football team there. And in 1907, he was named the All-Southern football team, which reminds me his great-grandson, Mac Morgan, who played at Lenore Ryan, was also a football standout up there. Anyway, he graduated from medical college at Davidson in 1909. He did an internship at Brooklyn Samaritan Hospital, and in 1917 came back to Albemarle and practiced in the Hill Building. His wife Nellie was an RN trained at Presbyterian Hospital in Charlotte. And before there was a hospital in Charlotte, Dr. Lentz, good-hearted soul he was, would actually drive patients to Charlotte who needed to be in a hospital. He just put him in his car and drove him over there. He was active in the Lions Club and a Mason. He did not keep records of what patients owed him. He would tell them that when good times come, you can pay me then. So when good times came, a lot of people owed him money and came to his widow after he'd passed away and said, your husband treated us when we didn't have any money. We want to pay what we owe him. And she had no records. So some people paid him and some didn't. So the lesson that I was taught by Dr. John Gaskin is remember from Dr. Lentz, always write down the charges. You may never collect a penny of it, but you might get it. Let me just discuss medical records a little bit. Dr. Seltzer has mentioned electronic records. Back then, index cards were oftentimes used, or a plain sheet of paper. Just on one page. You may just have the name, the date of birth, marital status, occupation on there. There might be one line, the date, and one line per visit would be it. There might just be the weight, the temperature, the pulse, possibly the diagnosis, possibly if there was an injection, that might be mentioned as treatment. When I got records when Dr. McKenzie retired, I would get on one page of paper 20 years of medical office visits. Because back then, insurance companies didn't have access to medical records. They didn't want them. So that they just write what the doctor needed to do. So medical insurance screwed all that up. Because it wasn't until 1947 that Blue Cross was available here to citizens of Stanley County. And now I'm going to mention one of my heroes, Wayland Nash McKenzie, one of my role models. He is the kid in the group. He's the youngster. He was born in 1911 in Ellerby, but he grew up in Norwood and graduated from Norwood High School. What was the mascot for Norwood High School? I don't know. Rams? Okay. He went to Trinity College in Durham and graduated in 1931. And he wanted to be a doctor. Well, he didn't want to go to that new medical school that was starting up in Durham that was called Duke. He wanted to go to a real medical school. So he went up to Richmond to the Medical College of Virginia, graduating in 1935. He did an internship at Norfolk General Hospital, and then got at Chapel Hill, got a public health certificate in 1937, and came back here. And in 1938, he started the Stanley County Health Department. He was the first real full-time public health officer. He had to invent the wheel. He couldn't go in and fill in. He had to design the whole department by himself. And he did that until 1945, and he went into private practice. Dr. McKenzie told me he delivered up to 300 babies a year during the baby boom, and plus a full-time general practice going to the hospital and all that. I mean, a busy obstetrician nowadays may deliver 150 babies a year, and that's all they do. On July 12th, 1950, he admitted the very first patient to New Stanley County Hospital, and on April 25th, 1981, he escorted the last patient out to the Stanley County Hospital to the present atrium building. He was the very first chief of staff at Stanley County Hospital. We would be the first two doctors to arrive in the morning, and he called me governor, and I called him professor. We had a wonderful relationship. I asked him one time, I said, when you started in 1935, what medicines did you have then that we still have now? And he said, not many. He said, we had morphine, quinine, digitalis, nitroglycerin, aspirin, codeine, they use cocaine too, and plus silver nitrate drops to the eyes. You people who are some obstetric nurses are out here, we used to put those to prevent patients from getting gonorrhea in the eyes. And speaking of gonorrhea, Dr. Seltzer is next.
That's why we needed a public health doctor here.
It's after 8, you can leave if you want.
But we're almost to the halfway point, people. No. Yeah. I won't use the off-color comment that leads to. All right. The next physician, we're almost done with Albemarle, and that's the lion's share of the physicians here, is Dr. E.C. Knoll. Essex Crystal Knoll was born June 3, 1923 in Virginia. He received his bachelor's degree from Virginia State College in 1944. I'll digress right now to point out that he was the first African-American full-time physician in Albemarle, and he was mentioned by Lewis Bramlett in his presentation 6 months ago on notable African-Americans in Stanley County that was given in honor of Black History Month at the Waddell Center in February. But we're not stepping on each other's toes here. He just basically mentioned, I'm going to give a little bit of background on him. Dr. Knoll married right after his graduation from medical school at Meharry Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee, and he interned at Lincoln Hospital in Durham, then spent several months practicing in Wadesboro. In August 1949, he decided to make the leap to the big city of Albemarle, and he opened a clinic in September of 1949 at the corner of Lundix and Erie Streets in what is now, was called Kingville then. In addition to the clinic, Dr. Knoll spent the next 11 years on the staff of Stanley County Hospital, first in general medicine and later in surgery and obstetrics. He also was a member of the United States Air Force Reserve. He was, as I mentioned, the first physician that lived and practiced in South Albemarle, and he was the school doctor. And many a student from kindergarten through high school at Kingville saw him for preventative exams or treatment of illnesses and injuries. In 1960, he elected to relocate to Greensboro and opened a practice there. In 1965, he returned to training in Washington, D.C. and became a psychiatrist, doing his residency in that at Howard University. And in 70 to 73, upon finishing that residency, he was the director of the D.C. Mental Health Administration. And in 1985, at age 62, he moved to Barbados to specialize in geriatrics there. After 5 years there, he returned to Washington, D.C. and retired in 1990 at the age of 67. He died at his home in Maryland in 1992. Dr. Knowles only practiced for about 3 months in the 1850 to 1950 timeline, but I felt his presence was significant at that, in this community at that time. And that brings up a matter, and that's initials. Have you noticed how many old-time physicians went by initials? I mean, these days, a lot of athletes and a lot of young kids go by initials, but it seems like just about every physician we looked at was known by initials. And I wondered why that was. There's several theories that I came up with. First, I thought it might be due to aristocracy. You know, America back in 1850 was less than 100 years old, and the British influence was still there. And in England, many of the landed, wealthy landowners go by initials. It's sort of a prestige sign. For example, I made up this one up, Sir J.B. Wexford, for example. So it may have been that physicians considered themselves to be on a higher plane than others at that time. That's just a theory. The second possibility for initials is it might have been personal choice. Some of these physicians were stuck with names they probably didn't like. Jasper Neal, Ogden Doremus. I mean, there were probably old names. Some came from the Bible, some from family people, but maybe they wanted to establish their own identity apart from their father or their other relatives they were named after. Probably the most logical explanation of that is they wanted to shorten their name. Even back then, physicians wrote their names a lot on documents, prescriptions, when they were available, and all sorts of other forms. So the more you write, the worse your handwriting gets, and you can save some time. Obviously, the doctors of 2020 or 2019 signed their names many more times. Insurance forms, different regulatory forms, all sorts of other notes and things like that. However, most of it now is done electronically, so they really don't have to work any harder to sign these. So that's food for thought. Think about that. Why did so many people go by initials then? I don't know. Now, we've completed the Albemarle bunch.
No, we haven't.
Oh, yeah, you've got a couple more, don't you?
Oh, yes,
well,
I
let me
do.
tell you something, okay?
Yes,
Did you
sir.
know that one time I had a serious girlfriend from Buffalo? Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
Well, we broke up, and I decided after that I was going to date a girl from human parents. Dr. Johnson?
Well, with that Buffalo joke, I'll wing that one. We
They're known
cannot.
as bison now.
Yeah, we've got a few more to go here on my
That's right.
list.
So you mean step on your toes. I'm looking at my
Jackson Kent Outlaw, born 1896, Kinston, North Carolina, and he graduated Wake Forest University back when it was in the town of Wake Forest in 1921, went to medical school in Syracuse, New York School of Medicine in 1923. He started general practice in Albemarle in 1926 at where else but the Hill Building. Later had eye, ear, nose, throat training and specialized in that. He was a Rotarian, a Mason, and a member of Central Methodist Church. He had a nephew who was named George Edens, who became a doctor here later. A man walked into a dentist's office, and he said, "I have this delusion that I'm a moth." The receptionist said, "Sir, you're in the wrong office. This is a dental office. You need a psychiatrist's office. By the way, what attracted you here?" He said, "The light." Okay. Next, the first fully residency-trained surgeon in Stanley County, Dr. William Trantham Shaver, went by W.T. Shaver, born in Rowan County in 1893, went to the medical school in Davidson, did his general internship and residency in Philadelphia. And again, he was the first fully residency-trained. In other words, after his internship, at that time they trained another 3 years to become a board-certified general surgeon. He initially practiced at the Baden Hospital for a year, and then they started the Yadkin Hospital, where he served as a surgeon in residence until his death in 1957. He also practiced in the Stanley County Hospital. He was a strong supporter of the American Legion and helped get the first Legion post started here, and also a strong supporter of Legion baseball, which of course had its great legacies with the great teams here. He was a Rotarian, and he belonged to Dr. Seltzer's First Lutheran Church. 60 years old when he passed away. Another doctor you've heard me mention a number of times is Dr. Talley, Bailey T. Talley, attended public school in Bowie's Creek. After graduating from high school, he was given a plot of land where he tended tobacco, and he earned $50 that summer growing tobacco. And with that money, he enrolled in Wake Forest College. At that time, all you had to do was show up and register. There was no SATs or any of that stuff. And he finished his 4-year curriculum in just 2 years. And he also was working part-time through that. He went to medical school at Thomas Jefferson Medical College in Philadelphia. It always interests me that a Virginian gets a medical school named after him in Philadelphia. Anyway, finished in 2 years. He worked incessantly. Graduated in 1921. Well, back home, the bank had failed, and he lost what money he had saved. So he had to take loans out to finish. He volunteered for the military before he finished medical school, and at the induction station, they said, "Go back and get your medical degree and come back." Well, the war was over by the time he finished. He did his internship at Watts Hospital in Durham. And then in 1924, he moved to Albemarle to join his medical school classmate, Dr. Ed Brunson. And again, the first hospital was the Brunson-Talley Hospital and the Stanley General Hospital that went on. He also was a Mason. In 1957 was the JC's Man of the Year. That is all I could find about Dr. Talley, except he lived on 10th Street. I know where his house is. We have another doctor here. We're rapid. We're to the W's already. Dr. D.P. Whitley, known as the Grand Old Family Doctor. He was the grandfather of Elbert Whitley, our former mayor, and soon to be inducted in the Stanley County Sports Hall of Fame. He was born out near Big Lick. There were quite a few Whitleys out that way. And remember, when he was born back in the 1860s, Big Lick was the biggest community in that part of Stanley County. He married Elizabeth Eford, returned to, and I'm sorry, I got that out of order. He taught school to earn money, and then he went to medical school at the University of Maryland in Baltimore, graduated in 1888, married Elizabeth Eford, and returned to Baltimore for training internship after his wedding. He set up practice in Millingport and served Western Stanley County. He had an operating room there, and he also had a pharmacy in the office. He had 3 sets of horses. You can imagine back in the 1890s, you had to have this. He had 2 for his morning rounds, 2 for his afternoon rounds, and 2 for his night rounds. And Whitley has told me the story that someone had to take good care of those 6 horses. Typhoid was a dreaded disease back then. It's still a dreaded disease. It's a terrible disease. I've never seen a case of it, but there was a severe epidemic in the early 1900s. And Dr. Whitley at one time worked 59 straight days without sleeping in a bed. He'd sleep in his carriage, just napping between cases. Typhoid, he figured out, was breeding in open wells, that rats who were sick with typhoid were going down into the wells and dying. People would draw water out of the wells and get typhoid from that. So he advocated closing all the wells, and then that people would have a well, the closed well that you have to use a pump to draw the water out of. He also started a well digging company too. Pretty clever, huh? In 1912, when the typhoid antitoxin shots came out, Dr. Whitley inoculated thousands of people in his office free. He also, when he moved to Albemarle, I neglected to mention that sometime in 1918, he moved to Albemarle, and he started advocating to get a telephone company here. And there are kids today who think that this is the only kind of phone, right? This is back in the numbers please days. Anyway, in 1918 was a dreaded flu epidemic. He worked tirelessly. He died in 1921. He never refused anyone care. Practiced 33 years. One more Whitley, not related. Virgil Alexander, V.A. Whitley, born 1857, 4 miles east of Albemarle. Apprenticed, he didn't go to college. He apprenticed under Dr. Richard Anderson, whom Dr. Seltzer mentioned here in Albemarle. He attended the University of Louisville Medical School and then transferred to the University of Maryland. Dr. Gaither, did you know you had all these people shared your alma mater, huh? He graduated in 1884. He moved to Norwood, and he and a gentleman named DeWitt Swearingen established Norwood Drugs. Now that's a name that's going to catch on, right, fellas? That's for the McNeil brothers back there, yeah. He moved to Albemarle in 1898. He made many house calls in a horse and buggy, often not paid. He also served as a health officer for the county and served on the school board and was a Mason. He died in 1911 at 68 years of age. A letter that he wrote back to his father when he was in medical school said, "Dad, help me find a horse for me and a place to practice here in Stanley County." And that he did. Now, Dr. Seltzer, you wake him up with Norwood, okay?
We are coming down the home stretch because at that time, most of the physicians in this county considered the big metropolis of Albemarle to be home base. But in New London, there was a big hitter named J.A. Allen, Dr. J.A. Allen. I do not know what the J and A stand for. He may be in initials that really have initials. He was born in Yadkin County in 1869. When he was young, a severe case of typhoid fever left him with a limp left leg. This spurred his interest in medicine, so he went to the Medical College of Virginia in Richmond and studied in the late 1890s and finally graduated there in 1901. He had heard that a doctor was needed in New London and Stanley County, and he left his home in Yadkin County with the notion of locating there. Back in his home community, he told friends that he was coming to New London, and they exclaimed, "New London?" They were astounded. That's the Stanley County, and that's the poorest county in the state. You don't want to go there. You remember, about 15 years later, Dr. L.V. Dunlap said it was the most prosperous county in the state, or something to that effect. Despite their warnings, he set out in his buggy for New London. Along the way, he stopped at farmhouses for water, and he would mention where he was going. Every single family tried to discourage him. "Don't go there," was their warning. "They tell me that a man can't even make a living farming there." Finally, in a little village outside of Moxville, he got so discouraged he turned around and went home. And not long thereafter, he located in Cool Springs, which is a community in Iredell County, and he practiced there for 4 years and married his wife. But he couldn't get New London out of his head. So in 1905, in June, he and his wife came to New London and immediately began his practice. He noted then that the power development projects were in progress along the Yadkin, and at that time, the diseases were rampant and they needed his help. And for the first 18 months that he lived in New London, he and his wife were boarded with another family. He bought some land near the New London Academy. I don't know where that is. Anybody know where that was? Where the school is now? Or, well, anyway, he was on the north end of town, and he built his office in the corner of the yard where people could come in for treatment. What is significant about well, I'm going to get to that in a minute. The nearest hospital, as Dr. Johnson, was at Salisbury, but he drew from a large area of patients, including Gold Hill, Millingport, and Tuckertown. There were only 2 couples living in New London at that time, and they were Mr. and Mrs. Jim Mooney and Mr. and Mrs. Eugene Russell. There were only 10 doctors in the whole county at the time, and we've heard about most of them. When the dams were being built along the Yadkin River, the backwater covered green vegetation which had not been cleared away. As this vegetation began to decay underwater, a very unsanitary condition resulted. A virtual epidemic of both typhoid fever and malaria followed. Only comparatively few preventive measures were known in those days, and many people were superstitious about methods of healing this or that disease. Dr. Allen practiced for 47 years in New London and retired in 1952. With the other 4 years he practiced in Cool Springs, and he died. He had practiced a number of 51 years, and he died in 1957. This was the only physician of note that I could find that ever practiced in New London. There was a Dr. Campbell that I read a reference to. There was 2 Dr. Campbells in Norwood. We'll get to that. It appears that the Richfield, New London area was served by the house call doctors that we've also mentioned. Meisenheimer may have been a separate entity because of the Healing Springs, but I do not think there were physicians involved there. That completes New London, and now we move on to Norwood. This is mine, isn't it? Okay.
Just take it away.
Norwood. Probably the most well-known doctor of 100 years ago was the Dr. Thomas Alexander Haithcock. He was a real legend in Norwood. He received his education and medical training at Trinity College, that was in the pre-Krzyzewski era, and also at the University of North Carolina and the University of Maryland. I don't know how he got around as he did. We have no records on that. He was born in the Mount Zion community of Norwood, and he had 9 older siblings, all of whom died in childhood. Following graduation, he came back to Stanley County. We are not certain of the exact year, when it first started, but when war was declared in Europe in 1917, at age 52, he volunteered. He was promoted to major, was highly commended by military authorities. He was a long-term member of the Norwood Methodist Church and superintendent of the Sunday school for 36 years and superintendent emeritus at the time of his death. He was an avid Democrat, and he always took interest in political affairs. He was a member of the school board in Norwood for 30 years. He served as the mayor of Norwood, a member of the city council, a member of the county board of education. He also served as president of Stanley County Oil Company, president of Riverview Milling Company, president of Norwood Electric and Water Company, president of Norwood Development Company, and president of the Bank of Norwood. He was quite the public citizen and I imagine quite the entrepreneur. Dr. Thomas Alexander Haithcock was born, as I said, in 1865, died in 1943 at age 77, and that's all we could find about the details of his practice.
He should have been called president instead of doctor.
Or Donald. Okay.
He was more presidents than he was.
Well, probably the earliest physician we have any record at all on in Stanley County, except maybe for Dr. Crone, was a Dr. Abram Shankle. Many older gentlemen, as you know, were spelled the biblical way, A-B-R-A-M, and it was later expanded to Abraham because that was easier to spell correctly. Little was known about the timeline for his medical practice. He was born in 1809. He settled in Norwood in the 1830s before the Civil War, the War of Northern Aggression, and he moved from rural Norwood to Albemarle, where he lived with Dr. Ogden Doremus King, another iconic health hero we've mentioned before. He compounded home remedies from herbs he grew on his farm. Before practicing medicine, Dr. Shankle was involved in numerous local government functions. Multiple documents bearing his signature were noted in the Stanley County Courthouse in the late 1800s. After his death in 1891, at age 81, he was buried at Randall United Methodist Church Cemetery, and his gravestone is still there. There were a number of other doctors that came and went from Norwood before 1950. A large number that you've heard of will be covered next time. Thank you, Les Young, for your very persistent research in this. I'll just read the names off. Dr. Matthew Waddell, born in 1820, died in 1883, surgeon in the Confederate Army during the Civil War. We don't even know the dates they're in practice or much else about him. Dr. John Tyson, born about 1845. Dr. J.M. Dunlap, no kin to L.V. Dunlap. He practiced with Dr. V.A. Whitley about 1891, according to the Southern Vidette, the Norwood newspaper that was described in a previous History Society presentation. Dr. I.M. Lilly practiced with Dr. Haithcock, I just mentioned, in the 1890s, but then relocated to Fayetteville. They were married to sisters and were brothers-in-law, but the relationship apparently didn't last. Dr. James Ike Campbell, no relation to the infamous Dr. John Campbell of the 1970s, he comes up next year, was born in 1875 and died in 1938. He practiced in Norwood sometime between 1900 and 1930. No other information about his practice is known. He was known to be a staunch Republican and often sparred with Dr. Haithcock, who was an ardent Democrat. Dr. Campbell twice ran for Congress as a Republican in the 8th U.S. Congressional District, losing the general elections both in 1920 and 1922. And Dr. Leland V. Lee Dunlap, no kin to L. Vic Dunlap, born in 1877, died in 1901. He was no older than age 24 at the time of his death. Must have been a child prodigy. We don't know anything else about this man. That's Norwood. Dr. Johnson?
Okay, well, we're going to handle Big Lick and Oakboro. And I have Dr. Flavius Eugene Hartzell, who went by the initials F.E. Hartzell, born on April 23, 1870, Cabarrus County, went to medical school in Baltimore, University of Maryland, graduating in 1895, came back and he opened a practice in Big Lick, and again, Big Lick was a predominant community in that part of Stanley County back then. In 1910, the railroad came through and he moved to what had been Fur City but was renamed Oakboro, and practiced 35 years in the Big Lick and Oakboro community. He was known as a great humanitarian, treating all people regardless of financial status, race, or creed. He is related to Jeff Hartzell, but the Hartzell family was unable to come up with any more information for him. His fee for delivering a baby was $20, and he was often asked to name many children. And with that, Dr. Seltzer's going to
Oak Borough
conclude.
was plagued after Dr. Hartz was over there with not having a doctor much of the time and having some people that came and went. There was a Dr. Malcolm Shields Dixon, D-I-C-K-S-O-N, who worked briefly, then moved to Burlington. There was an H.E. Vaughn, who practiced in Big Lick in 1914. He disappeared. That's all we have till Dr. Walter James McClendon came to Oakboro. Dr. McClendon was born in 1914. He was a native of South Carolina, but grew up in Kernersville, North Carolina. He attended Mount Pleasant Collegiate Institute. Was that up the road here? Anybody know about that? Okay. North Carolina State College, I assume that's the Wolfpack School, and the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and he received his MD from the Medical College of Virginia in 1941. After internship at Charlotte Memorial Hospital, he became the city physician for Roanoke, Virginia. He felt there was a better offer for him at Oakboro, so he relocated there in 1946. He lived at 108 West 9th Street in Oakboro. He was a staunch member of the First Presbyterian Church of Oakboro, where he was an elder for 25 years. Dr. McClendon was a team physician for every school in the western part of the county, and he died unexpectedly in 1972 at the age of 58. Now, he only practiced Oakboro for 4 years, but I felt his standing as the only full-time doctor there after a number of decades warranted inclusion in this project. We tried to find if any doctors had been based in Locust, Finger, Red Cross, and we come up with none. In Millionport, we had the Dr. Whitley before he relocated to Albemarle. As we said, many of these communities were very small, maybe just had a church and a crossroads, and they were served by horse and buggy doctors making house calls. Well, we're going to have to charge History Society for overtime.
8 o'clock.
Yeah, okay. Okay, at the Stanley County History Center, also known as the Stanley County Historical Museum, right across 2nd Street from where we are now, in a different direction from First Baptist Church, there is now on display an exhibit about health care in Stanley County in prior decades with additional information and equipment that will complement our presentation. We recommend you take this in. And please remember that the Stanley History Society is staffed only with volunteers, and our purpose is to aid the museum staff in their mission to preserve the heritage of Stanley County and provide fun and education for citizens of all ages. The Society would love to add additional members, and the dues are very reasonable and certainly support a worthy cause. Pat Bramlett and Joyce Lambert would be glad to discuss the Society with you, and you can visit the History Center's website or Facebook page as well. Dr. Johnson and I are certainly looking forward to bringing you the next chapter of Health Heroes in 2020. We learned a great deal about the physicians we mentioned, as well as life in Stanley County in the past. We plotted through oversights and errors on our part, but the entire process was well worth it, and we are gratified to see such a great turnout tonight. We have learned from our experience, and we intend to give you an even better look at more recent Health Heroes from 1950 onward in Part 2. So, as Chicago Cub fans formerly stated annually until 2016, wait till next year. Thank you for allowing us to ramble on. We've had a ball. We'll be glad to talk to people at the podium here. Questions, discussions?
Neither of us brought any exam gloves, so.
I brought some of that Kentucky jelly, KY jelly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you guys so very much. This is probably the most educational and entertaining program that we have ever brought to you. So, Les Young is going to be at the back with membership forms that Dr. Seltzer mentioned. So if any of you would be interested in those, he will be at the back. Joan Udy is back there with flyers about our next program, which will be Lint Heads Remembered. Jim Lisk, if you would stand up, please. Jim is going to be doing our program on Thursday, September the 19th, and it will be on the Eford and Wiscasset Mills. So hope you will join us. We will be back at Central again in the Fellowship Center next time. And our new minister is still here, I believe. Jill, do you want to welcome everybody to Central? And if anyone's not getting our emails to keep you up on things going on at the museum and the History Center, there are 2 pads on the chest back there at the back where you came in. We're so glad you were here. We'll look forward to seeing you in September. And thank you again, guys.
Class dismissed.